The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains, startling Eleanor Summers as she hurried along the dirt road toward the ranch that promised her last hope. Texas, 1875, was no place for a desperate woman alone, but desperation had driven her 200 miles from her burned-out homestead with nothing but determination and the clothes on her back. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as she approached the sprawling property, her throat parched and her stomach painfully empty. Xavier Norwood wiped sweat from his brow as he heard the unexpected sound of footsteps approaching his porch. Setting down his rifle he'd been shooting at coyotes threatening his chickens, he turned to find a woman standing at his gate, her dress worn but clean, her posture straight despite obvious exhaustion. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, his voice carrying across the yard. Eleanor stepped forward, clutching her small satchel tighter. "I heard you might need help, sir, with the harvest coming." She swallowed hard, pride nearly choking her. "I'm looking for work." Xavier studied her carefully. Slender but not frail, with eyes that told him she'd seen hardship but hadn't been broken by it. His farm was struggling after losing 2 hired hands to gold fever, and the wheat wouldn't wait. "Farm work isn't ladies' work," he said, though without conviction. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," Eleanor replied, lifting her chin. "I can work as hard as any man you've hired." Something in her determination stirred something in Xavier. Maybe it was loneliness after 3 years working this land alone, or maybe it was just the way the setting sun caught her auburn hair. "I'll make you a deal," he said, the words coming before he'd fully thought them through. "I'll work beside you if you'll be mine." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Yours." "To court," Xavier clarified quickly, his tanned face flushing. "Proper like, you work here, I pay you fair, but you also allow me to court you. That's my offer." Eleanor considered the tall cowboy before her. He wasn't like the rough men she'd encountered on her journey. His eyes were kind beneath his weather-worn hat, and his ranch, while modest, spoke of honest work and care. "I accept your terms, Mr. Norwood, Xavier Norwood." "Eleanor Summers," she replied, extending her hand. Their hands met, and something electric passed between them, something neither had expected but both immediately recognized. "Let me show you where you'll stay," Xavier said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "There's a small cabin behind the main house. Used to belong to my foreman before he caught gold fever and headed to California." Eleanor followed him, taking in the modest but well-maintained ranch. A 2-story farmhouse stood proudly amid fields of wheat and corn. A barn and stables housed several horses, and chickens pecked contentedly in a fenced yard. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Xavier glanced at her with surprise. "Most folks just see hard work." "I see that too," Eleanor admitted, "but also something worth working for." The small cabin was simple but clean, with a bed, table, chair, and small stove. "I'll fetch you some water to wash up," Xavier said. "Supper's in an hour if you're hungry." "Thank you," Eleanor said, fighting back unexpected tears at this first kindness she'd been shown in weeks. After he left, she sank onto the bed, allowing herself a moment of relief. She hadn't told him everything about the fire that had claimed her parents' farm, about the men who'd set it when her father couldn't pay his debts, about her desperate flight. Some stories were best saved for when trust had been earned. Supper was a simple but hearty affair of beans, cornbread, and coffee. Eleanor ate with careful restraint despite her hunger. "Tomorrow we start on the north field," Xavier explained. "Wheat's nearly ready, and we've got to get it in before the rains." "I'll be ready at first light," Eleanor promised. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Eleanor wondered about the strange bargain she'd struck. Courting in exchange for work seemed an unusual arrangement, but something about Xavier Norwood's honest eyes made her believe he was a man of honor. Xavier, meanwhile, sat on his porch wondering what madness had possessed him to make such an offer. He'd been alone so long that the sudden presence of a woman, especially one with eyes that reminded him of the deep green of spring wheat, had apparently addled his brain. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret the impulsive offer. True to her word, Eleanor was ready at dawn, dressed in the work clothes Xavier had left for her, his youngest brother's old things. Too small for Xavier, but still large on her slender frame. "Ever used one of these?" Xavier asked, holding out a scythe. Eleanor nodded, taking it with familiar hands. Since I was 12, working side by side in the golden field, Xavier found himself watching Eleanor more than the wheat. She worked with a steady rhythm, her movements efficient and practiced. By midday, when they stopped for water and bread in the shade of an oak tree, he was thoroughly impressed. "You weren't exaggerating about knowing farm work," he said, passing her the water jug. Eleanor drank deeply before answering. "My father believed daughters should work alongside sons. Said it built character." "Smart man," Xavier commented. A shadow passed over Eleanor's face. "He was." Xavier caught the past tense but didn't press. They had all day, after all. Instead, he pointed to the distant hills. "My grandfather settled this land in 32. Came from Tennessee with nothing but a mule and dreams. Built it up acre by acre. It's a fine piece of land," Eleanor said, looking around at the rolling fields. "Gets lonely sometimes," Xavier admitted, surprising himself with the confession. Eleanor's eyes met his briefly. "Loneliness can be found in a crowd, too." That evening, as they ate supper, Eleanor's hands were blistered despite her experience. Xavier wordlessly brought out a tin of salve after they'd finished eating. "Give me your hands," he said gently. Eleanor hesitated, then extended her palms. Xavier's touch was surprisingly gentle as he applied the medicine, his calloused fingers careful against her tender skin. "Thank you," she murmured, acutely aware of the intimacy of the moment. "Part of our bargain," Xavier said with a small smile. "If I'm courting you, I get to take care of you too." Days turned into weeks as they worked the fields together. True to his word, Xavier paid her fair wages, which Eleanor carefully saved in a small pouch hidden beneath her mattress. And true to the other part of their bargain, he courted her with a sweet earnestness that gradually wore down her defenses. On Sundays, they would ride into town for church services, where Xavier proudly introduced Eleanor to the townsfolk. Some raised eyebrows at the arrangement, but Xavier's standing in the community and his obvious respect for Eleanor silenced most gossip. As July turned to August, the wheat harvest was completed, and they turned their attention to the corn and the vegetable garden that provided their daily meals. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Xavier turned to Eleanor. "You never told me what brought you here," he said quietly. "Running from something, weren't you?" Eleanor stiffened slightly, then sighed. The weeks of honest work and Xavier's steadfast presence had earned her trust. "My parents' farm in Missouri was burned by men working for a banker named Hargrove. My father borrowed money after 3 bad seasons, couldn't pay it back fast enough. They came at night. My parents didn't make it out." Her voice trembled slightly. "I hid in the root cellar. When they were gone, I took what little I could salvage and ran." Xavier's hand found hers, warm and solid. "I'm sorry, Eleanor." I kept moving, afraid they might come after me as a witness. Worked where I could, kept heading west. "Then I heard about your ranch needing hands." She gave him a small smile. "I didn't expect the courting part." "Neither did I," Xavier admitted. "Just came out, but I'm not sorry it did." Eleanor's heart fluttered at the earnestness in his voice. Over the weeks, she'd come to appreciate not just his kindness and fairness, but his quiet strength and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. She'd found herself looking forward to their evenings on the porch, to the gentle way he'd begun to touch her hand or arm, always respectful, always asking with his eyes first. "Neither am I," she confessed softly. The next day brought unexpected trouble. Eleanor was in town buying supplies when she overheard a conversation that chilled her blood. "Looking for a woman," a gruff voice was saying to the shopkeeper. "Red-haired gal, green eyes, name of Summers, might have come through here in the past month or so." Eleanor ducked behind a shelf, her heart pounding. Through a gap in the goods, she could see a man in a dark suit, not one of Hargrove's men, but likely a hired gun or detective. "Can't say I recall anyone like that," the shopkeeper replied, though his eyes flicked briefly toward where Eleanor was hiding. The moment the stranger left, Eleanor gathered her purchases and hurried to where Xavier was waiting with the wagon. "We need to leave," she said urgently, climbing up beside him. "Now." Xavier didn't question her, just clicked to the horses and set them moving. Once they were out of town, Eleanor explained what she'd overheard. "They've followed me," she finished, her hands twisting in her lap. "I should go." I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Xavier's jaw tightened. You're not going anywhere alone. This is your home now, too. The word home caught Eleanor by surprise. In the weeks she'd been at the ranch, it had indeed begun to feel like home in a way no place had since her parents' farm. Xavier, these men are dangerous. So am I when protecting what's mine, he replied, his voice hard with determination. That evening, they made plans. Xavier rode to his nearest neighbors, alerting them to possible trouble and ensuring they would keep watch. He cleaned his rifles and checked his ammunition, while Eleanor paced nervously. I should never have stayed in one place so long, she fretted. Xavier caught her hand as she passed. Eleanor, look at me. She did, her eyes wide with worry. I'm glad you stayed, he said simply. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. For 3 days, they continued their work while keeping vigilant watch. On the 4th day, as they were bringing in the last of the day's harvest, they spotted 2 riders approaching from the east. Get to the house, Xavier told Eleanor, his hand going to the rifle slung across his back. I'm not leaving you alone, she replied firmly, picking up a pitchfork. Xavier's protest died on his lips at the determination in her eyes. Instead, he positioned himself between Eleanor and the approaching riders. The men stopped a respectful distance away. One was the man Eleanor had seen in town, the other was older, well-dressed with the look of authority. Mr. Norwood, the older man called. I'm Marshal James Bennett. We're looking for a Miss Eleanor Summers. Xavier's grip tightened on his rifle. What business do you have with her? She's a witness to a crime in Missouri, the marshal explained. Nothing against her personally. In fact, we need her testimony. Eleanor stepped forward despite Xavier's protective arm. Hargrove sent you, didn't he? The marshal shook his head. Hargrove's been arrested, madam. His men too, those we could find. Your neighbor, Mrs. Whittaker, she saw everything that night. Came forward after Hargrove tried the same strong-arm tactics on her son's farm. Eleanor's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Xavier steadied her with a strong arm around her waist. You mean, they're facing justice? She asked, disbelief clear in her voice. Yes, madam. But we need your testimony to make sure it sticks. That's why we've been tracking you. Relief washed over Eleanor, so powerful she couldn't speak for a moment. Xavier invited the men down, his manner still cautious but less hostile. Over coffee in the farmhouse kitchen, Marshal Bennett explained that Hargrove's scheme had finally unraveled when too many farms mysteriously burned after failing to repay loans on his impossible terms. We've been building a case for months, he explained. Your testimony would be the final piece we need. I'll testify, Eleanor said firmly. Whatever it takes. The journey back to Missouri would take weeks, and the trial might take months. As the marshal and his deputy prepared to leave, they would return in a week to escort Eleanor east. Xavier pulled Eleanor aside. You'll come back, he asked, his voice betraying more emotion than she'd ever heard from him. Eleanor looked up at the man who had offered her work, shelter, and his heart. If you want me to, Xavier's hand cupped her cheek. I want more than that, Eleanor Summers. These past weeks, they've been the best of my life. Eleanor's heart soared at his words. Mine too. Then marry me, Xavier said simply, before you go, so you'll have my name and my promise waiting for you when you return. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. They were married 3 days later in the small church in town with their neighbors as witnesses. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed Eleanor with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of care. The parting, when it came, was difficult. Eleanor, now Mrs. Norwood, stood on the porch with her new husband's arms around her as the marshal and his deputy waited patiently. I'll write every week, she promised, her eyes memorizing Xavier's face. And I'll be here waiting, he replied, pressing a final kiss to her lips. This is your home, Eleanor, always. The journey back to Missouri was long but uneventful. The trial lasted through the fall and into early winter, with Eleanor's testimony proving crucial to convicting Hargrove and his men. Throughout it all, Xavier's letters sustained her accounts of the ranch, the changing seasons, and most importantly, his growing love for his absent wife. When at last she was free to return, it was mid-December. Snow had begun to fall as the stagecoach carried her the final miles to the ranch. As they crested the last hill, Eleanor's heart leaped at the sight of the farmhouse, a lantern burning in every window despite the early hour. And there on the porch, just as he'd promised, stood Xavier. He ran to the stagecoach before it had fully stopped, throwing open the door and gathering Eleanor into his arms. "Welcome home," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor clung to him, breathing in the scent of home and husband. "I'm never leaving again," she vowed. That night, as they lay together in the bed they now shared, Xavier traced the curve of Eleanor's cheek in the moonlight. "I have something to show you tomorrow," he said mysteriously. The next morning, Xavier led Eleanor to the north field where they had first worked together. There, where once wheat had grown, he had cleared a large area and laid the foundation for a new structure. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, puzzled. "Our new home," Xavier explained, his eyes bright with excitement. "The old house is fine, but I thought, for our family, we might want something built together, from the ground up." "Our family," Eleanor repeated, the words filling her with warmth. "If you want children," Xavier said carefully, "I've always dreamed of filling this land with laughter." Eleanor took his hand and placed it on her stomach, watching as understanding dawned in his eyes. "I'm already carrying our first," she said softly. "I found out just before the trial ended." Xavier's whoop of joy echoed across the plains as he lifted her into his arms, spinning her around carefully before setting her gently on her feet. "When?" he asked, his hand still protectively over her stomach. "Early summer," Eleanor replied, smiling at the wonder on his face. "Around harvest time." "Perfect timing," Xavier laughed. "Just like his mother, or her father," Eleanor countered with a grin. As spring arrived, the new house rose steadily alongside Eleanor's growing belly. Xavier insisted she rest more, taking on extra help for the planting, but Eleanor still supervised the garden and helped with the lighter work around the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch of the old house, planning their future while watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Did you ever imagine this?" Eleanor asked one such evening, her head resting on Xavier's shoulder. "When I first walked up that road asking for work." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "Not specifically this, but I knew something important had arrived on my doorstep." Eleanor smiled, thinking back to his impulsive offer. "I'll work beside you if you'll be mine," she quoted. "Best bargain I ever made," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Their daughter was born on a warm June evening, with the help of a midwife from town and Xavier pacing anxiously outside until the first cries pierced the air. They named her Hope, for all she represented in their lives. By the time Hope was taking her first tottering steps, the new house was finished, a spacious two-story home with plenty of room for the growing family Xavier and Eleanor both wanted. They moved in on their second anniversary, carrying Hope between them as they crossed the threshold. "To new beginnings," Xavier said, kissing his wife while their daughter giggled between them. "And to work worth doing together," Eleanor added, her heart full. In the years that followed, the Norwood ranch prospered. Xavier's careful management and Eleanor's keen eye for opportunities allowed them to expand their holdings. 2 more children joined Hope, a boy they named after Eleanor's father, and another girl who had Xavier's smile from her first day. The hardships didn't end, droughts came and prices fell, and sometimes the work seemed endless. But through it all, they worked side by side, just as they had from that first day in the North Field. 10 years after Eleanor had first walked up that dusty road, she and Xavier stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard with the family dog. "Any regrets?" Xavier asked, his arm around her waist. Eleanor looked up at him, at the face now so beloved and familiar, lined with a decade of laughter and occasional worry, but still handsome as the day she'd met him. "Not one," she said truthfully. "Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't made that offer." Xavier chuckled. "I'd have hired you anyway, couldn't let good help walk away, but I might not have found the courage to court you proper. And I might not have stayed once the harvest was in," Eleanor admitted. "Then I'm glad I spoke without thinking," Xavier said, pulling her closer. "So am I," Eleanor replied, stretching up to kiss him. "So very glad." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant orange and gold, Eleanor thought about the long journey that had led her here, the tragedy that had set her on the road, the desperate courage it had taken to ask a stranger for work, and the unexpected love that had grown from that simple beginning. She had asked for work in his fields, and he had offered to work beside her if she would be his. Neither of them could have imagined then what that simple bargain would build: a family, a home, a life rich with purpose and love. It wasn't always easy, nothing worthwhile ever was, but as Xavier's arms held her close, and their children's laughter filled the evening air, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she had found something infinitely precious. Not just a place to work, but a place to belong. "I love you, Xavier Norwood," she said softly. "And I love you, Eleanor Norwood," he replied, the words as true and steady as the man who spoke them. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after." Together they watched the first stars appear above their land, the land they had worked with their hands, the land that had witnessed their bargain, their courtship, their love story. The land that would, God willing, sustain their children and their children's children for generations to come. It was everything neither of them had dared to hope for on that fateful day when a desperate woman had asked for work, and a lonely cowboy had offered his heart alongside employment. A simple beginning that had grown into a life more beautiful than either could have imagined, built day by day, season by season, with love and hard work and unwavering faith in each other. And in the gentle Texas twilight, that was more than enough.